see the chair just not cooperating with the green screen. That's great. Oh, it's on this side. I don't really know the difference. The other day, I was reading through some reviews of Metaphor ReFantasia, and I came across a few interesting ones. One in particular that was much more harsh on the gameplay side of things than anything else. And it kind of got me thinking. Everyone has different reasons for playing different games of different genres. In this case, JRPGs and RPGs in general tend to span multiple genres, and thus can have a lot more variety in your reasons to play them. So what's your reason for playing JRPGs? I'm going to talk about mine a little bit.
Hey, are you asleep already? You know how hard it is for me to turn these pages on my own?
Keep it short and sweet, just get to the point. I play most JRPGs for the story. The adventure, the plot twists, the characters, all of it. JRPGs are not really going to blow your mind with the themes and stories they tend to tackle, especially if you've played a handful of them. A lot of these narratives are a power friendship saves the world kind of story. But if you're looking at the writing as a must-be-unique kind of thing, I think that you're missing out on the many different interpretations of a similar idea. Despite what I'm saying here as well, not all JRPGs are the same. Just because you follow a similar outline to other stories doesn't mean you're actually going to have a good story. Even if, in the end, it's all power, friendship, and bonds saving the world, there's nuance to it. If you're only invested in the story's end, and not the journey the characters take to get there, have you really experienced and understood the plot? In my eyes, you can be excited for the end as much as the journey in the middle. If you're not invested in either one, or if you're too invested in one more than the other, then sometimes things don't work out. There are a lot of games within this genre that I've played specifically for the story, even though the gameplay looks off-putting to me. 13 Sentinels, Fire Emblem, Persona, Xenoblade Chronicles. Some of my favorite games and series have pulled me into their stories and worlds despite my aversion to specific aspects of the game. And that in turn has led me to play games I would have never played otherwise, introducing me to genres I would have never touched. Stories are the driving force for me to play JRPGs, even when the games rehash the same ideas, even when the themes match the last game I played, even when the characters embody the same tropes. There's something great about still being able to get lost in a story, in a world, in the characters, even if it's predictable. Story isn't everything, though. Of course, I know a good reason a lot of people play games is obviously for the gameplay. And something you'll be able to notice is that a lot of older JRPGs have a lot more complex and unique gameplay ideas. This also happens in older games in general, when the studios and the creatives are just trying to find their footing, but not all of their ideas are able to fully cement in a good way, or just create a very complex game design. And that's kind of the reason I tend not to jump on older JRPGs. It's not really about the, oh, it's so clunky kind of thing. That word is really overused, and it's at the point where I hardly know what anyone means when they say that anymore. But it's kind of similar to the complex and gimmicky characters in a fighting game. This analogy might get lost on some people, and maybe it's not really a good analogy. Who cares? Some characters are conceptually really good, but there's a character that requires equal or less effort for the same or a better result. It creates a paradox where, in theory, you can get really far if you spend hundreds or more likely thousands of hours honing and perfecting your techniques, but you could achieve the same results with 75% or even less effort and time with a different character. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that some older JRPGs are like this, at least for me. In my eyes, that's the Tales series. I spent 40 hours playing Vesperia, and I could not enjoy the feeling of the combat system. I understand the idea that it's kind of like a fighting game, but I just couldn't get into it. I wound up dropping the game in its second act, and I've never gone back to finish it, and I probably never will. The gameplay systems just weren't enjoyable for me, and in that sense, a JRPG can put me off gameplay-wise. On the other hand, newer Tales games are the ones that I like more. They don't really achieve the same highs in terms of the appeal and enjoyment, but I was much happier with the much less complex and more dialed back combat. Another game kind of like this is Xenoblade, in terms of gameplay appeal. I wasn't off-put by the combat of 1. In fact, when I went back and played Definitive Edition, I was much more into it. But 2 does such a poor job at teaching you that I pretty much spent the first 30 hours feeling like battles were just slow and monotonous. And then suddenly, by 30 hours, everything clicked. It was a really neat combat system, but it just requires a ton of patience and attention to learn. And to get it to feel good means you have to sink in the time, or you have to look up videos because the game is not going to teach you properly how everything works. And ultimately, to me, 3 feels like it toned back quite a bit, but I really enjoy it a lot more than the other 2 games in terms of its gameplay. Now, of course, gameplay is kind of hardly the main reason I play JRPGs. As I've said, this genre has introduced me to other genres, I didn't even need to be interested in them in the first place. But I can understand why combat systems and gameplay are appealing and a good reason to pick up a lot of these games. And like I've been saying, just outside of unique gameplay, there is a ton of variety within RPGs and JRPGs. Despite being a genre itself, JRPG is more of a broad categorization for a wide variety of games that kind of also isn't that strictly defined either. You have strategy games, auto-battlers, turn-based combat, real-time action, ATB something, brawlers, puzzle games, the list goes on and on. I found that JRPGs tend to be pretty proficient in turn-based combat, and it feels like they really are invested in perfecting that. Meanwhile, real-time action JRPGs tend to be a bit rougher, but to be fair, my benchmark for a perfect action game is incredibly hard to meet. Anyways, when it comes to more standard gameplay, it's pretty easy to tell which JRPGs will jive with your interests. As for me, I don't have a particular gameplay style I prefer, but there are definitely things that will throw me off. Turn-based games that have a little bit too much going on at first glance, like Atelier or Ryza, are kind of off-putting to me. Meanwhile, games with too little happening, like auto-battlers, tend to just be thrown off my list. There aren't a lot of JRPGs I can say that I personally played exclusively for the gameplay, but I guess, as I said before, JRPG is a very broad categorization that's pretty loosely defined. So if we're calling things like Monster Hunter and Elden Ring JRPGs as opposed to RPGs, which is kind of hard to differentiate, the line is pretty blurred, so if we're calling those JRPGs, then those count. I play those exclusively for the gameplay. I do not care about the story.
I'm not a freaking casual. I bought shit from here like last week.
There's a whole dollar per hour argument about video games where, oh, if you spend $60 on a game, it should give you 60 hours of entertainment at minimum. And I personally find that to be a little finicky. Unfortunately, most games cannot stretch to those 60 to 70 hour lengths, especially when you run the risk of padding stories and creating boring side content just to satisfy the 5 users who are even going to do that stuff. On top of that, for every edition you choose, you have to cut something else. This isn't bootlicking, this is just a fact that developers are not allowed to spend money and time as they please. They have deadlines, they have constraints, and they have corporate overlords balancing the checkbooks, or sometimes not balancing them. The developers most always cannot do everything they wanted with a game. Even the best games have cut content. But what I'm getting at here is that I personally do not find this to be a good reason to engage or not engage with a game. Or well, I guess that's a little more subjective. If you don't have the money to spend on a $60 experience, you shouldn't be spending that money. And if you're trying to find a game that will be worth your time, that's a little bit different. But if you're just choosing games to play purely based on how many hours you're going to be playing them, I don't know, it's a hard argument to make, because not everyone's financials are the same. However, if you do find this to be part of your reason when it comes to buying games, oftentimes JRPGs will have some of the best bang for your buck experiences. Many of these games stretch to 60, 80 to 100 hours for completion, and even longer if you intend to do everything. For $60 to $70, that's pretty good overall. So if that's your reason for playing JRPGs, good for you. I'm always welcome to more people playing games in this genre, especially since these games are typically very niche. Unless your name is Final Fantasy.
There's no doubt. That's real gold.
And at the end of the day, my reason for playing JRPGs could easily be attributed to my reasons for playing anything at all. But JRPGs are definitely more specifically geared towards stories. Something like a fighting game or a racing game would mostly have different reasons. I wouldn't really be invested in the story as much as the gameplay, the mechanics, and probably the visuals as well. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. You can play games for whatever reason you want. I'm not here to throw judgment at you or bash you down with a hammer saying, no, you have to play JRPGs for the story. You can play games for whatever reason you want. It's a video game. But let me know your main reason for playing JRPGs in the comments down below. Or maybe you're looking to get into them and you don't know what your main focus would be. As always, you can leave a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe to the channel for more things JRPG related down the line. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.